Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays. This is a video series I have on my channel where I talk about champions in League of Legends who generally struggle with seeing much play in solo queue and competitive, and it may not necessarily be because they're a weak champion, at least not entirely. For today, let's talk about Ziggs, everyone's favorite Yordle pyrotechnician, if not the only pyrotechnician. He's a curious little guy because despite his very low representation everywhere, Riot kept a close eye on him and has periodically been giving him buffs throughout a few years. Not small ones either, most of these would be pretty big if they were given to any of the other popular champions. But since Ziggs got them, not really affecting all too much. And that's what we're going to talk about for this video, but before I get into it, let me first start off by welcoming everyone if this is your first time watching one of my videos. And for all the Ziggs mains out there, I'd like to establish that this isn't a champion hate video, nor do I mean to slander the champion and say that he's bad and you shouldn't play him. You should still keep maining him if you enjoy the playstyle. The purpose of Why No One Plays is to discuss possible reasons from a gameplay and game design perspective as to why certain champions are not as popular as others, which doesn't always link to how well they're performing at this current point in time. This will primarily be discussion based where I break down all the things about Ziggs that are potentially working against him when it comes to his play rate. So if you find this video enjoyable, then please be sure to leave a like, comment down below, and share this video with your friends. After you're done watching this episode, check out my other Why No One Plays videos if you're interested, but for now it's time to get started. Not the first artillery mage I've covered in this series, and he certainly won't be the last. Ziggs epitomizes what a champion in his subclass should be. Long range, really good damage, usually all skill shots, slow and fragile. Because these champions have insanely long reach in their attacks, usually their abilities break above around 1300 units, their strength is also their greatest weakness. Artillery mages, or poke mages as most of the community calls them, function best when the line of scrimmage between both teams is strictly maintained. And while they can single-handedly pressure enemies from a safe distance, they're also vulnerable to divers or tanks who can very quickly close the gap and neutralize them if they just step up a little too far. Of course, weaknesses are part and parcel for every champion. Having them doesn't make you a bad one, and not having them does not make you a good one. But for those of you who watched my Vel'Koz video, you'll probably remember when I mentioned that artillery mages, in general, are a dying archetype in League of Legends, and Ziggs, the elder statesman of said archetype, has arguably suffered the most out of any of them, never reaching above a 5% play rate in Platinum Plus, aside from a little spot in early Season 7, which I believe was when mages first started being played in the bot lane. Even then, it was so brief he became obscure not even a couple months later. Without a doubt, Ziggs is one of the least played champions in the entire game within the past 5 years. So I'll begin by explaining why he's had the worst results out of all other poke mages like Xerath, Lux, Vel'Koz, and Zoe, and this ties in with problem number 1 with him. Despite conceptually the job of a poke champion being to continuously sling damage from a long distance like a catapult or ballista would in old-time warfare, from a gameplay perspective, it's absolutely necessary for every champion, regardless of their class or subclass, to have set ability rotations. Not only that, but at least 2 of their abilities need to make sense in conjunction with one another. Ziggs, on the other hand, has 5 separate damage dealing abilities with individual functions, none of which really complement one another, and for all intents and purposes are just standalone attacks. None of these feel really great to level up either, so Ziggs lacks any real gratification from power spikes. I'd say the biggest issue with this kit is that his passive short fuse is a very strange ability to have on a champion who is designed to attack from a far distance. While the ability to raise towers to the ground resonates with this team as a demolitions expert, in-game it's not a passive I think that feels too good to really get off. In fact, I'd wager a lot of players probably don't even know what his passive is because of how inconsequential it feels at times. Some of the other poke champions like Zoe, Lux, and Xerath also have auto-attack empowerments for their passives, but the reason why it works well on them is because they either have an alternative means of triggering said passive or can safely trigger that passive without putting themselves in any danger. Ziggs on the other hand doesn't have a combative benefit from short fuse. It adds a lot of damage to his auto-attacks, but if he gets close to hit a champion, that also means he's close enough to get engaged on. And he doesn't get much use out of it on anything else besides towers, which mages break very easily anyway. Onto the rest of his kit, Bouncing Bomb, Satchel Charge, Hexplosive Minefield, and Mega Infernal Bomb are strong attacks in their own right. His Q is an insanely long range with relatively cheap mana cost and it's quite spammable. Satchel Charge is a passable disruption and reposition tool, but its main draw is that Ziggs can use it to execute towers, which makes him a dangerous threat for sieging. Explosive Minefield is a strong zoning tool that can usually block off entire jungle pathways, and Mega Infernal Bomb is a huge semi-global ultimate that can be deadly in choke points or enclosed areas like the Baron and Dragon Pit. But the issue is that none of these abilities gain any real advantage from being strong in a specific order. They're all meant to be thrown individually for their individual situations. Not a bad thing, mind you, but again, a lot of players enjoy muscle memory and repetition. Almost every attacker in League has a set rotation of abilities, heck, even other poke mages. Vel'Koz's Tectonic Disruption allows for Void Rift to connect his second shot, and Plasma Fission can continue to slow targets for him to cast his ultimate. Xerath can use Eye of Destruction to slow targets to land an easy Shocking Orb and then Arcano Pulse. With a specific order of abilities to cast, players can grasp that champion much more comfortably and subconsciously. On paper, it seems like it's not really that big a deal, but bread and butter combos have a psychological impact on players. That's why in almost every PvP game, players love to stick to combos. Take Smash Bros. Ultimate for example. I know I reference that game a lot despite the two being apple and orange, but regardless of what type of game you're playing, certain user experience concepts are universal. Fighting games often reward players for being unpredictable, mixing up their neutral game so as not to be punished by bad habits. But even the best players utilize their character's bread and butter because it influences how they play that character. If you have solid kill confirms such as up throw to up air for Inkling or down throw to up smash like Rob, you'll want to put yourself in the best situation possible to land those kill confirms because of how effective that combo is. Going back to League of Legends, it's exactly the same thing. Zed usually harasses in lane by tossing out his Shadow, using Shadow Slash to slow down targets to then make it easier for him to land Razor Shuriken. It's a very standard combo to understand, but it works very well. I'm not saying that's Zed's only combo, but it's a common one, and that's why he's so popular because he has an effective and easy bread and butter rotation. Landing skill shots is inherently a difficult task because players have to get really proficient at reading their opponent's movements and even making predictions as to where they will dodge. For Ziggs, all 4 of his attacks are skill shots, and while his W and E and Ultimate have somewhat generous hitboxes, it's not really easy to land all of them one at a time to attack someone, so you then have to resort mostly to just spamming Bouncing Bomb a few hundred times. That can be fun in ARAM when everyone's clumped up together and you can have your way with them, but in a regular Summoner's Rift game it's not a very interesting kit because most of it is just mindlessly throwing stuff at the enemy and hoping that they take enough damage. It's a very campy playstyle. Poke champions generally lack important power spikes, which lowers their reward factor for players. Champions can have major power spikes in 2 ways, items or levels. Examples of level power spikes would be Darius and Kassadin at level 16, Renekton at level 6, Urgot at level 13, Kayle at level 11, so on and so forth. Item power spikes are still very much in development since it's the new season, but some common ones back then were Yasuo with Phantom Dancer and Infinity Edge, Kai'Sa with Muramana, Rageblade and Nashor's Tooth, Fiora with Ravenous Hydra and Trinity Force, Ryze with Seraph's Embrace and Rod of Ages fully stacked up, stuff like that. These champions all get a major power boost when crossing a certain threshold, making them very gratifying to play when you do reach that point. Ziggs on the other hand doesn't have a meaningful goal. Sure, the more items you build and the more you level your abilities up, the more damage you do and perhaps the lower your cooldowns are, but you never really look at Ziggs and go, oh no, he's level 16, or crap, he just bought Horizon Focus, we're all gonna die. An enemy Talon can still look at him as a vulnerable champion to snipe quickly, or Malphite just doesn't really care and he flash ults you. Not every champion needs to have a rewarding power spike to feel good to play, but usually the popular champions have either a rewarding power spike or a rewarding playstyle. Ziggs has neither, nothing really too exciting in his kit, and it's pretty unremarkable to the majority of the player base. And this is further exacerbated by the fact that newer champions and reworks are coming out with far more explosive and fiery playstyles. Not to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but the game has evolved to become much faster and more impatient, directly countering the type of playstyle and game state poke champions like Ziggs want to have, a very patient, slow, and methodical war of attrition. Just like Vel'Koz and Anivia, Ziggs can contribute ridiculous damage if his teammates play around him, and he has the opportunity to do so. But rarely do you find that ideal situation where you can play War of Attrition. There are so many popular champions right now, and probably more in the future, that can easily break through his literal wall of fire. Not just assassins and divers like Echo, LeBlanc, Katarina, Zed, and Kha'Zix, but even other battle mages who have shorter ranges like Victor, Kayle, and Vladimir. They can make quick work of him because they have burst options that are much easier to land while also possessing either the mobility to get close to him and dodge his skill shots or a defensive tool to prevent him from damaging them altogether. His matchup spread is polarizing to say the least. Ziggs has a few matchups that he completely dominates simply because he outranges them and they have no easy way to get close, like Syndra, Twisted Fate, Ryze, Veigar, Lucian. But on the flip side, there are so many junglers and mid laners who can disregard his greatest strength and strike him down from 2 screens away. Consequently, Ziggs is a very inconsistent champion because his performance lies entirely on what the enemy's team composition is. Other artillery mages like Lux and Vel'Koz perform slightly better either by virtue of greater utility or more teamfight presence, but since Ziggs is purely a poke champion with a bit of zoning pressure, there's nothing he can really do when champions can circumvent it. Hexplosive Minefield offers him a zoning control tool when placed in choke points like the jungle, but even then they don't do a very good job of impeding enemies with dashes or high mobility who can either just go right through it or walk around it. And while Satchel Charge can be a decent get-off-me tool, it doesn't put much distance between you and your pursuers. He lacks a consistent means of kiting. On the other hand, if we took the slow from his minefields and put it onto his Q, that'd be a different story. He can constantly chuck Qs for cover fire. But basically what I'm trying to say is that Ziggs struggles to stop enemies from engaging on him, and he also doesn't do too well either when they choose to attack him. Trying to play Ziggs is like playing in a minefield, pun intended, that can explode in your face if you make even the slightest mistake. Should you play Ziggs well enough, there are still so many high mobility or hard engaged champions that can rush you down without you being able to even do anything. Now I could say that an advantage he has over other poke mages is his semi-global ultimate, which can allow him to aid his teammates from a safe distance, but Xerath also has a semi-global ultimate, which in my opinion is a lot more consistent since it's faster and has multiple shots which can pick off targets if they scatter. Mega Infernal Bomb by itself is not really a good ultimate because at max range it takes over 3 seconds to travel, at which point if the target is not stunned or rooted in place, they can just walk out of the radius. I think the underlying cause of Ziggs' unpopularity is that he's too fair of a champion. All of his abilities are just fair. You might be thinking why that's a bad thing. It's not. Every champion in theory should be fair, but because of the way Riot designs their characters, they usually have to have some unfair mechanic in order to be viable. Samira's W being a 360 wind wall, Malphite's Q being a point and click poke that steals movement speed, Zoe being able to one-shot you from 2 screens away, Aphelios with 5 weapons, Akali with 20 dashes and a stealth. Even if Riot nerfs those champions to the ground, players will still complain about playing against them because it just feels unfair, no matter whether it is or isn't objectively. Ziggs is a really unimposing champion, and I'm not just talking about his size. He's just not someone you really see as a threat, and I think that's why people don't want to play him because he just doesn't stand out in any way. The reason why champions like Kha'Zix, Rengar, Malphite, Katarina, Yasuo, etc. are popular whether they're strong or not at the time is because of the inherent pressure they put just by being alive. You see a Malphite on the enemy team and the entire game you're going to have to be wary of his ultimate. Or if Rengar is fed, you're going to be scared to go through your jungle, things like that. But nothing about our little demolitions Yordle really strikes fear into the hearts of his enemies, nor does he bring much reassurance to your team either. Teammates probably would feel more secure if they had a Karthus, Vladimir, Ahri, Diana, Echo, or even a Vel'Koz in mid lane instead. So what do you guys think about him? If you're a Ziggs main, I'd love to hear what you have to say because I and probably many others don't see anything about Ziggs that makes him stand out. In fact, I think there are more cons to him than pros, at least in the current moment. If you could change anything about him to make him feel more fun to play, what would you do? Or if you think Ziggs is perfectly fine as he is now, then let me know about that too, because if you have a defense for this, then I'd be more than happy to hear about it. Anyways, thanks to everyone who made it to the end of the video, hope it was worth your time. Once again, this is not a champion hate video. I know many of the things I said about Ziggs were painted in a negative light, but I have no personal bias against the champion. I'm mostly looking at his shortcomings from a design perspective and more importantly, just from an outsider's perspective. If you'd like to support my channel, best way you can do so is like the video, comment down below, share this with your friends, subscribe for future uploads, and check out my Discord server if you'd like to talk more about League content. Also, if you still have some time and want to keep watching, I have a playlist of all the Why No One Plays videos, so perhaps if you feel like binge watching, you should check out my other episodes. Lastly, if you want to, consider donating to my channel either through PayPal or Patreon, I would appreciate it a lot. Patrons get to vote and even request their own videos in the future, so if you have a particular champion you'd like me to talk about, then maybe you can check that out. Links are all down below, but for now, that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon for the next video. Take care.